Hi everyone online, if you're still here. Welcome to this session on bringing data into public finance decision-making processes in the education sector. So I'm hoping that this is going to be a nice applied session with some kind of really in-depth case discussions of Sierra Leone. And I think in a kind of very broad sense, what we're going to start with is we'll get a kind of general framework for thinking about the connections between public finance data and education data systems and kind of public financial management systems more generally. And then we'll kind of use that as a kind of way into looking at the kind of specifics of a given case and looking at Sierra Leone. So my name's Sierra Hadley. I'm a researcher here at ODI. I work on the kind of public finance and service delivery work that ODI does, and also very interested in how finance ministries use evidence. So I'm kind of really interested to hear what comes out of this. I'm joined by three presenters, two here in the room, one online. I've got Alistair Fraser here next to me. Alistair is an independent economist working quite extensively these days in the field of education. He's worked in ministries across different parts of Africa on different aspects of education financing, and most recently was with the Global Partnership for Education as a thematic lead on domestic finance. Alistair also contributed to the paper or led the paper on EMIS, on Education Information Management Systems, which is available here in the room or outside. We've got Iman Biokubets. I hope I pronounced that right. Give me a nod if I did. Give me a thumbs down if I didn't. Iman is the EdTech Hub country co-lead for Sierra Leone, and she's working through open development education. And prior to this, she was with the Ministry of Basic and Senior Secondary Education in Sierra Leone as a data analyst in the minister's delivery team. So thanks, Iman, for joining online. It's really great. And lastly, I've got Ali McIntosh of Fab Inc. He's an education economist specializing in sector project level costing, value for money, girls' education, and has been working also kind of extensively in Sierra Leone on the education data and across its kind of education data ecosystem. So, brilliant. Thanks guys for joining. I'm really looking forward to this. What I'm going to suggest is we're going to have three presentations. I'm going to let everyone run through their presentations. And then we'll have a kind of full kind of 45 minutes or so for Q&A. So with that, let me turn over Alistair to kind of kick us off.
Great, thanks very much. We're here today with a few slides on really how do EMISs and how can EMIS and the PFM's system really help each other, and also some of the sort of common challenges that affect both. So, I mean, from a kind of financial management perspective, digitizations clearly affects, consulting hundreds, thousands, or hundreds of thousands even of schools. There's a clear kind of gain from digital there that's maybe more obvious to stupid people like me than even within PFM itself. One of the things we looked at was across the kind of the 6 EdTech Hub focus countries, how they use data in the budget process around education. And the 6 countries are Pakistan, Sierra Leone, Bangladesh, Ghana, Kenya, and Tanzania. They've just added Malawi, which didn't cover, but which I can also speak about due to other work. But anyway, so the first slide kind of suggests, how we kind of covers why us, why write this paper. And there has been, there was a roundtable in 2021 with UNESCO and GPE that covers, that was literally called the Future of EMIS, but what we wanted to look at in a lot more detail was kind of the ministries of finance and centers of government as kind of organizations that could try and drive higher quality and kind of more engagement with EMIS. So often EMISs are kind of they're very projectized, and they're kind of, it suffers from some of the same problems as PFM interventions, where we kind of try and open this box and, we over 3 or 4 years, we fund an EMIS installation. And there has been what a lot of the digital kind of impetus has been towards real-time systems where you get kind of very frequent data on, and also richer data. So it kind of goes beyond enrollment counts, but they also kind of struggle to survive beyond the kind of donor intervention. The other issue is, of course, like when they're being planned, they don't necessarily talk across government, but kind of there are all these kind of registers and repositories, particularly in kind of ministries of public service, which are kind of the HR functions of government. And of course, even across these kind of focus countries, local government has kind of substantial involvement in Ghana, less in Kenya, other than ECD, and they, on paper, there's a lot of local government involvement in education in Tanzania, although that's now, it gets kind of, they're being crowded out every year by the central government. So obviously the learning crisis is this kind of major issue in education where 70% of lower income students aged 10 can't read a single sentence, according to mainly the kind of learning assessments and household studies. There's been work over the last kind of 40 years where some systems, as they've grown in terms of access, have got worse in terms of quality, sometimes kind of quite substantially worse. And there are, PFM objectives around government efficiency. The central government can be kind of more aligned towards driving efficiency than ministries of education. So there are ministries of education who really want to transform their sectors, and there are a lot of ministries that don't. And sometimes there is a kind of reform opportunity where you look at the Ministry of Finance as an organization that can kind of pull up the Ministry of Education, really. And of course, finance really isn't everything in terms of learning, but it can, better financing processes can unblock some of these constraints. So I want to move quite quickly to the kind of the reflections, recommendations, just to keep this ideally within time. And so some of these problems that are faced by ministries of education in collecting reasonably accurate EMIS data are also faced by other agencies and governments. And some of the data is already being collected essentially when teachers are hired and employed, and it's kind of duplicated across the EMIS. And there's a potential for verification if there's more work across government. And it's also, ministries of finance should be interested in kind of data integrity as a government-wide issue. Although, awareness of the agenda beyond access isn't often very high in ministries of finance. As far as I found, there's still the kind of 90s focus in a lot of ministries on access. And of course, in some countries, so for instance, Pakistan and even Kenya, in terms of school completion, the access still matters. It's still an agenda that matters. But anyway, we have EMISs that usually collect all the data. So they collect their frame. They do poll every school, but they don't necessarily poll every school accurately. And information on repetition is typically, which is a huge issue for kind of efficiency, but also, it's so for instance, in Uganda, it's a huge issue around kind of getting, school heads to try and kind of progress teachers through, students through. That isn't collected with really any accuracy by many EMISs, as far as we can tell. And that's obviously an issue for financing, because in a lot of the countries we looked at, and even kind of way up in income distribution, we also kind of looked at the UK and South Africa's systems. You are still at some stage counting children and sending money after them at some stage of the system. I think everywhere, but some regions of Pakistan don't yet do that, but everywhere else did. And then there is also a wider interest from the kind of ministries of finance side in terms of being able to relate money, usually donor money, to results. And that also requires a lot of EMIS integrity. And there are kind of big questions around whether it's possible to kind of, with using national systems, verify the EMIS data to ensure that payments are reasonably are based on data that has some integrity, really. And I think one of the other, why care about ministries of finance if you're planning an EMIS is obviously like they end up paying for the ongoing costs. These are expensive exercises. And the other point to make that we found sort of interesting was that at different levels of income, increasingly at richer countries, so for instance, South African provinces, UK local councils, they're doing extra work identifying children in need, whereas at lower income levels, it's area based and often quite it can be quite iniquitous financing, really, but it is more kind of area based, top down targeting of poorer and richer areas. So I think, next slide, sorry. So, and one of the big issues that comes with a kind of projectized donor intervention is that they do then try and kind of link data sets across government to avoid kind of duplication, and to kind of make the data sets richer, to link with kind of learning assessments, for instance, and also to link with kind of teacher characteristics, and just with linking data and integrating data is something that it's when we're talking about teams and kind of building teams, it's a particular capability that's often really difficult to kind of retain in government, or even outsource using government resources beyond the length of a donor project. I mean, systems approaches might help, but it's still something that is obviously India, Bangladesh, very different context to, say, a smaller state in Southern Africa, for instance, where the talent will be hired elsewhere in the region, or just if it's a very small country, there's kind of a pipeline issue in terms of the number of people really prepared to link data. And I think, I mean, hopefully, Microsoft Copilot and AI will solve all our problems there, but there's still issues around kind of knitting together different data sets. So the kind of approach that we're looking at is around kind of more of a look at the kind of social political challenges of running an EMIS, of whether there is really an appetite to have a richer data set that might kind of connect more to the learning agenda, whether there's any of the mindset changing in place that you would need to, for instance, record repetition properly, because after all, even if it's not a financial issue, head teachers want a quiet life. And if you tell them that repetition or pass rates or completion rates should be 10%, that's what they'll report. And I think that's kind of what our kind of major point is, that you have to really have a list of temporary and permanent functions. So functions that you want to kind of have as kind of part of the kind of donor project length, or for a set amount of time, or to tackle a particular government problem, ideally. And then also these permanent functions, a kind of core EMIS data set as well. And we also think that if you want kind of honest, accurate data, it's going to have to start with the system being useful to schools. So I know, not to criticize Tanzania while they're outside the room, but there is this issue around their system just faces PORALG, which is the central government. There's very little information that is, at least there was 2 years ago when I was looking at it, there's very little information that faces back to even local governments, and you can kind of forget about schools getting much from all this data that they're providing. And the single source of truth is kind of just, again, it's one of these things that's kind of as easy to write on a slide, but very, very difficult to actually do. And I think we discussed some of those issues in the paper. Anyway, am I out of time?
No, you're good.
Okay. So these are, might be too small to see on a screen, but these are the recommendations, and they're kind of around 3 themes. And and one of them is kind of, really, if possible, and it is obviously in some contexts, ministries of finance won't be interested, and central agencies won't be interested, but there are often opportunities to, education is the biggest or second biggest line in most lower income, so low and lower middle income country governments. And there should be some, interest in kind of leveraging a more efficient system. It is also about trying to convince ministries of education that they can then keep the resources if they don't, if they do have teachers to reallocate, or resources that can be reallocated as a result of greater, internal efficiency in terms of actually progressing children through the system. And again, it comes back to this point about building a kind of capability, because there are, education is a highly politicized area. It's also an area where the thinking about what we should actually do about the learning crisis changes quite regularly. And I think kind of, you do need to build a capability to then, revise what your system does. It isn't just a kind of monolith that, you can unpack and then it's an annual school census and we knit that together with other data and then we go away. And I do also think when we think about EMISs, there are costs and benefits to a kind of state-of-the-art approach, which involves kind of very high frequency data. There's not many government officials even around the budget process. Typically, countries use it once a year to allocate. Ideally, they'd use it several times, including in the evaluations phase of the budget. This information from the EMIS, but they probably don't use it every month. They don't use it every week. The idea that there are kind of that decision making is kind of fast acting across education systems is kind of it suffers from the sort of what's called the Pritchett rule, where you're inventing things that don't happen in very high income countries for low income countries to do. The second set of recommendations is just around focus on schools, because at the moment they just face so few incentives to give anybody any accurate data at all. And you do need a system whereby you don't penalize people who don't have electricity, and I think that's very difficult to do if you're designing allocation formula. It's also just it's very hard to kind of come up with a system that looks at data verification and integrity. There's talk of using inspection systems and trying to turn them into quality assurance systems. That depends on the attitude of the inspectors, and it really has had very mixed results in various countries. And then across government, we do talk about kind of, there are countries that haven't used, big data to transform their systems. So Vietnam famously has this system where 16-year-olds are better prepared, kind of more capable than they are in kind of Scotland or England. And they've done that. They do have a good EMIS system, but it's very decentralized, and they don't use the EMIS system for kind of, machine learning driven insights at present anyway. Or at least they got to the stage that they're at without this kind of data revolution. And it's the same with kind of, ODI have a really good paper about Malaysia, and kind of, it is possible to develop without wonderful PFM functionality, although you do probably need good enough PFM. And then we also talk about, kind of welcoming data from outside and trying to, there's a big pushback against that. And there's kind of a really good recent survey done by Lee Crawford and others at Centre for Global Development about how, difficult it is to persuade people to use sample-based data in government, but it's a kind of door that we just need to push at, because the data, in some ways, lower income governments can't necessarily produce data of that quality. And they face different incentives. Anyway, anything else, Carl, you want to add? Or okay, cheers.
Thanks, Alistair. So I mean, two little things I think people can remember, or can maybe come back to in the Q&A, but this kind of idea of temporary and permanent functions of the EMIS. And the other is, I think, something that's going to come up over and over again, which is like, it's easy to say but hard to do. So with that, why don't we kind of move from this kind of general and kind of cross-country picture to Iman, who's going to start kind of giving us a flavour of how this looks in Sierra Leone. So over to you, Iman. If you can share your slides from your side, that'd be great.
Can everyone see my slides? I hope it's come up. Okay, great. Well, I'm sorry that I can't be there in person today, but I'm really happy to be here to speak to you all today about some work we're doing in Sierra Leone. So my name is Imambio Kubetz, and as mentioned earlier, I'm one of the country leads for Sierra Leone for EdTech Hub. I'm currently based in Freetown, Sierra Leone, so I'm giving my presentation from there. So this presentation is mainly going to focus on how the government of Sierra Leone have been using data for decision making and how we at EdTech Hub have been able to support this work. So I'm going to start by taking you through a brief background of the education data landscape in Sierra Leone. And then we'll move on to some of the work that EdTech Hub have done, which has been working on mapping the Sierra Leone education data ecosystem. And here I'll give you an overview of the research that we did, and then I'll just go over a couple of the findings. After that, I want to look at a particular case study of an example where the government have actually been encouraging schools to use data at the school level, and in particular using technology, in this case tablets, for data management. And then finally, I want us to kind of look forward and see what the next steps are here. So what's actually happening in education data in Sierra Leone? The government, alongside different government partners, have already started to invest in the collection and use of more data across the education system as a whole. So this includes collecting dynamic data on teachers and students and aiming to consolidate this information into one single source of truth. So one point that Alistair made in his presentation earlier was that a single source of truth requires, joint work and common aims across the government, not just in the Ministry of Education. And this is definitely something that the ministry are taking into consideration already when they're trying to create this single source of truth, which is really a good start. So although using data for decision-making has been made a priority for the Ministry of Basic and Senior Secondary Education, there are low levels of coordination within the government, between donors, between the government and their donors. And this has resulted in a lot of fragmentation and duplication across the data system. So there are involvements at all levels, which is great, from HQ in Freetown to district level and at the school level. But we do need to be wary of staff turnover when we're trying to get this to have more of an impact, because this could affect our efforts to actually embed the new system, which is what we're trying to do now, and making sure that we're able to embed it at each level of the education system. So one way the government have actually invested in data for decision making is by looking at tablet-based tools, specifically for school leaders to support data management at the school level. And even though we've tested the data system, we do need to make sure that we keep exploring how to structure the tools to make sure that they actually support the school leaders in the best way and support the teachers so that they can then find the best ways to actually support their students and increase learning. And another example that the ministry have used in terms of using tablets is the use of tablets among school quality assurance officers. So here they're actually using these tablets that have been given to them to collect information on lesson observations, any kind of school quality assurance issues, and also verifying attendance in the different schools within their clusters. So now we're going to have a look at the mapping that we did at EdTech Hub on the Sierra Leone education data ecosystem. So here we basically wanted to understand what challenges there are in the current education data ecosystem, from collecting and using data at the policy level to those who are using data in the schools. And by understanding these challenges, we wanted to see what can be done to make it easier for stakeholders to actually use the data they have to make decisions. As a result, we decided to create a mapping of the education data ecosystem in Sierra Leone. So here, our aim was to understand who collects, handles, uses, and actually needs what data to support the education decisions that they need to make. By doing this, we wanted to be able to provide a basis for developing a more consolidated system that would reduce duplication. And we were able to carry out this study by doing quite a lot of semi-structured interviews, and 59 in total, with government officials at both the central and the district levels, as well as different donors and NGOs that are working in the education space here in Sierra Leone. So now I just want to take you through 4 key findings from our mapping. So firstly, a really interesting thing that we found was that there isn't actually a lack of education data in Sierra Leone. Many MBSSC directorates and units have developed different systems and tools for collecting and managing data. Well, we have the TSC, which is the Teaching Service Commission, also have additional systems that they're using to collect and manage teacher-related data specifically. So when we spoke to all the directorates and the units, they were able to tell us how they're actually using the data they collect and what data they also need to make their decisions. Then when you add the data that's being collected by the different NGOs and donor partners, we found there is a lot of education data in Sierra Leone. Now, although there isn't a lack of education data, the different systems do not speak to each other. There are a number of different data systems from different directorates and units in the MBSSC, the Teaching Service Commission, as well as systems created by donor partners. And I guess the creation of all of these different systems, I think, stems in part from the perceived need to actually collect data to verify the accuracy of the information from the other sources. So through this study, for example, we actually found 17 different data collection programs spanning across 11 government directorates and units. And of these 17 different data collection programs, they had at least 5 different funding sources. So this leads me directly onto our third finding. Our study found a large amount of duplication amongst data collection efforts and those who are actually handling data on the same topics. So as you can imagine, if there are 17 different data collection programs, it's likely that some of them are going to be collecting data on the same topic. So for example, we found 9 different entities collecting or handling data just on teacher background. So we have the Teaching Service Commission, which handles all matters related to teachers. But there are still 4 directorates and units at the Ministry of Basic and Senior Secondary Education, the MBSSC, that are also collecting and handling data on teacher background. So as you can see, just from this example, there is a significant amount of duplication. And finally, we found that there was a lack of coordination amongst the government bodies as well as the donors. So the government doesn't really have a designated space for different entities to share information on their data collection efforts and their programs. So as a result, there are different directorates collecting information on the same topic. And these directorates are then working with different partners and donors, and therefore have developed different systems and tools to collect and manage all of the school and teacher related data that they have. So in many cases, they are collecting and managing data on the same topics. So now I've kind of given you an overview of what the kind of looks like in terms of the education data ecosystem. I want to spotlight on this example of the government actually encouraging the use of data at the school level. So in 2021, EdTech Hub collaborated with the government and the UK aid-funded program SLEAMS, which looks at secondary improvement. And we were partnering to look at using technology specifically for data management at the school level. So we actually looked at a tablet-based data collection and management tool that would be used by the school leaders. And our aim here was to understand how and why school leaders actually engage with tablet-based management systems. And we did that by asking 3 main questions. So number 1, how do school leaders engage with tablet-based surveys to manage school level data? Question number 2, what influences the engagement of school leaders with the One Tablet per School program? And finally, question number 3, how can the government iterate the program design to increase the collection and use of data in schools? So we tested this data management tool in 80 schools in 2 districts in Sierra Leone. So 40 schools in Western Area Urban, which is where Freetown is, the capital, and then 40 schools in Port Loko, which is about 2 hours outside of Freetown by road. So here we took a mixed methods approach that included real-time data analysis, as well as semi-structured interviews with the school leaders, those who were involved in the program. And the results of this user testing experience were actually used to inform the One Tablet per School program to ensure it better meets the needs and expectations of the school leaders who are going to be the main users. So from this research, we had 4 main findings. Firstly, we found that in terms of engagement with the tablet and submitting data, school leaders mostly fell into one of 3 categories. They were either early adopters who submitted data most days, hesitant adopters who submitted data now and again, or non-adopters who rarely submitted data. And when we actually went and spoke to these principals in these semi-structured interviews, we were able to speak to all 3 categories to get an understanding of what was and wasn't working for them. So from these discussions, we found that those who were early and hesitant adopters were already actually using the forms for school improvement and management, and they were taking action based on this data that they were collecting. So one thing that I remember noticing in one of our interviews was one of our principals was really eager to show us the data that she'd collected and show us how she was able to see at just the touch of a button how many students were in each class, disaggregated by girls and boys, how many teachers were there. And I feel like she really was happy that she could have that information and use it so easily. So secondly, from our conversation with the school leaders, we did find a number of reasons that made engagement difficult for them. So reasons for limited engagement that we mainly found with the program was firstly that they had little time to actually collect the data. As to a lot of the principals, this was extra work. So they had already had competing priorities, they had a high workload, so collecting data on this tablet wasn't necessarily a priority for them. School leaders also noted some systemic challenges, such as the lack of pay for them, for their teachers, and the integration with other systems. In some cases, there was some resistance from teachers who felt the system was like a witch hunt. And one of the principals noted that their teachers had said, why has our school been chosen for the teachers to be monitored? Why aren't they monitoring all the teachers? And then lastly, a further barrier was the need for more airtime and mobile data for them to actually submit their forms. So one issue that kept coming up, and although the principals are allocated a certain amount of mobile data through the Lewiland program, they felt that at times this wasn't enough, or it ran out before that they wanted to actually submit their forms, which was really interesting. Thirdly, despite the barriers to engagement in some cases, the school leaders that did engage with the program had an increased leadership capacity as well as administrative efficiency, similar to the example that I mentioned earlier. So school leaders felt that collecting this data actually encouraged them to use the data for school improvement and gave them a greater understanding of what was going on in their school, whether that be keeping better track of which teachers were attending their classes regularly, or knowing at any moment how many students were in the school and in each class. And as I said, disaggregated by girls and boys. So this collection and use of data led to a consistent cycle of learning and improvement for the school leaders and for the teachers. And finally, school leaders expressed a need for the government to actually take action based on the data that they were collecting. So they felt that if they were going to invest time in actually doing this data collection and they're going to be sending the data up to HQ, then it would need to lead to the government taking action. In particular, school leaders wanted government to actually get involved in terms of teacher absenteeism, so the teachers could see that there would be consequences for them not attending school. And one school leader actually said, and I can quote, that monitoring teacher attendance would be worthless if the Teaching Service Commission does not sanction absenteeism. So we can see that at times, although we are encouraging principals to collect this data and use this data, their data is going up and nothing is necessarily coming back down, which would be a problem if we're trying to roll this system out nationally. So now looking forward and looking at what's next. So what is next for the education data ecosystem in Sierra Leone? From our research, our findings showed the challenges between the supply of education data and the use of this information in decision-making. And we were able to see how we can actually support an improved system by working together. So moving forward, we've been able to support the government to create a roadmap for a consolidated education data system that provides this single source of truth. Here, the government have actually obtained funding from GPE for data system strengthening. The mapping of the education data system showed the need for more coordination amongst partners. So as a result, partners are coming together to actually support the ministry in a much more consolidated approach. So for example, EdTech Hub have been working with Fab Inc. and Lewilan to see how we can bring all of the different pieces together. So I think we all kind of decided that we don't necessarily need to have one system as such, but we do need to make sure that the systems that we do have are going to be talking to each other for decision makers to actually be able to use the data effectively. So here we can ensure there's consistent data collection amongst the different partners at all levels, which will then avoid duplication and fatigue for those who are actually doing the data collection. To help further this coordination, a data harmonization working group is being created by the government, and this will be headed and chaired by the Ministry of Basic and Senior Secondary Education and the Ministry of Technical and Higher Education. So partners, donors, and other ministries will be invited to join to ensure there is coordination of all the data related exercises, not only within the government system, but within the education system, but also across the government as a whole. And finally, the One Tablet per School program has successfully rolled out the first phase in 60 government and government assisted primary schools, and will soon be rolling out in 300 schools for the next phase. So not only will this program show the value of using data for decisions at all levels, it will also enhance the culture and understanding of using data for decision making. And I guess in the future, we hope to see a system where everyone agrees on the importance of data collection and they're all bought into this process, and that they'll be able to see the importance of data use and then actually use the data accordingly. So thank you all for listening, and please don't hesitate to contact me if you would like more information. Thank you.
Brilliant, thanks, Iman. And again, like sort of the sense of the kind of fragmentation of systems is kind of really useful to kind of draw out sort of so specifically. I also kind of picked up on your points about the incentives around data and data use, and what was interesting, I suppose, from your presentation is it is both about the school level and the kind of, you know, the kind of higher levels of government and how those two relate. I think touches a bit on what Alistair was saying earlier. But with that, Ali, why don't you kind of kick us off onto the next set of slides.
Great.
And the discussion of the school census in Sierra Leone.
Great. Yeah, thanks everyone. It's great to be here today. My name is Ali McIntosh. I'm an education economist with Fab Inc. It's an education consultancy specializing in a lot of things to do with data systems. We've got people from educationalists, economists, data scientists, software developers. So trying to bring those skills to improve data for decision making in developing countries. We've been working in Sierra Leone for the past 5 years, working closely with the Ministry of Basic and Senior Secondary Education and the Teaching Service Commission. And it's been really great listening here today and hearing about some of the efforts and the challenges in digitalization from the Ministry of Finance sides. And it's been very interesting to see kind of the same efforts and some of the similar challenges coming up, particularly when we're looking at the education sector in Sierra Leone as well. So it's going to be, I'll try and pull out some of those similar threads whilst I talk through this as well. First, I want to talk a bit about kind of how Sierra Leone has gone from the annual school census and the kind of just one-off reports to more of a education management information system, like Alistair was saying, and then how this is being used kind of for more data for decision making, particularly as Iman mentioned as well. And so a couple of things that sort of come out here is like a few years ago, much of the annual school census data was kind of on one person's hard drive in the ministry, and someone else might have another year's set of data. And so this isn't kind of set up for decision making. So one of the things that's been great is there's been a real commitment to improving access to data from the government. And then with this focus, I think partners have been able to then support the government, and kind of there's been a good drive to work together, try and solve some of the problems that people want help with. And finally, I think something that came out earlier this morning about the kind of problem-driven iterative approach. I think one of the key things that's been going on in Sierra Leone education sector is improving incrementally, and trying to take what's there and make steady, sustainable steps to improving it. So from those kind of school census data being on different people's hard drives, this has now been collated into a secure cloud database that has school level data from 2015 through to now. And as new data comes in, this makes it easier to, the processing and cleaning time gets easier each year. And this means that the school census data can be more readily available for planning use, in a more timely fashion. This also has the benefit of using with more years worth of data. We can see if there's any anomalies as it comes in, and been working with the Ministry of Education this year on the most recent census to each day identify, oh, there's an anomaly in what's in the number of students that this school says they have, or the number of classrooms, and or particularly things to do with the EMIS codes, which is key to keeping the clean database. So we've been able to follow up on that in real time, and this is something I think the Ministry of Finance as well is keen to ensure that the student numbers are accurate, as this forms the basis of subsidies. And so one of the things as well that we're seeing from this is that the improvements in the data quality and the data accessibility is bringing increasing demand for more data. And so, as Iman was saying, there's the data harmonization working group being set up to try and improve interoperability across some of the systems. And there's also, it's increasing demand in ensuring these systems, can talk to each other and can be more useful and harmonized. So one of the things that's happening here is we're developing the school master list from something that was on Excel and updated kind of in an ad hoc fashion, and then they had different spreadsheets that in different people's computers into a online onto a database that can be set up so that each different users can access the API and get the current latest school master list, and ensure that everyone's kind of working from the same hymn sheet, from the same book, so that we can improve interoperability going forwards. One other key part that's really helped in the education data is the collecting geodata on the latitude and longitude of schools, which can really improve some of the quality of data analysis that can be done. And also you'll see some spatial tools that can help with planning as well. And there's a great commitment as well from government that these things are made publicly available. So some of the different tools I'll talk through are publicly available online. And there's also the education data app, which summarizes some of this key data on enrolment, gender, teachers, and even a map of where the schools are is available on the web and on Android and iOS as well. And so in terms of, where Sierra Leone is kind of moving forwards to is, as Iman was saying, trying to improve sort of data for decision making. And so one of the examples in terms of the incremental steps is, as Iman's saying, we've been looking at bringing together not just this school census data that that is collected each year, but bringing that into the to be used at the same time as real-time data from some of the school quality assurance officers on the tablets, and ensuring that, for example, district officials can see not just the snapshot one-off data, but also kind of the performance-related data that's happening regularly in schools. And so one of the steps that's been made is, to make this available in one place for users like those district education officers. And then, as well as just showing this data, there's a number of tools that have been made to help improve some of the decision making from this as well. And so one of these is example on the left-hand side there is a tool to decide where to build new schools, and for catchment area planning, also things in terms of where to build new classrooms, ensuring this is a real data-driven approach. So MBSSC is now using spatial algorithms for this sort of micro planning. And again, it's a publicly available tool there. And thinking as well from the Ministry of Finance perspective that we were discussing earlier, this can show as well that any money that does come for new school construction, for example, will be used in the most efficient way, and will build schools in the most needy locations from a data-driven perspective. And it also, one of the other functions of this is similarly for deciding where schools will be funded as schools get approved. So if there's kind of too much budget, too many schools in need of approval but not enough budget to add the schools, there's a data-driven process to choosing which schools get selected as well. And another similar example that's being worked on with, we're working on with the EdTech Hub is around teacher allocation, and then just developing a flexible tool that the Teaching Service Commission can add in the things that they want to prioritize in this round of recruitment, and having a tool that adapts to that and helps select, again, in a data-driven way, which teachers to add to payroll. So kind of, we've said a bit more about the ministry and the Teaching Service Commission side, but one of the things for this talk today about PFM side of things, I'm not from the government myself, but I can say that I've seen an improvement in engagement between ministry and the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Education and Teaching Service Commission. And in terms of some of the data needs that are being swapped between the two. So I think TSC recently has asked for a bit more data to be within the payroll data to help them manage teachers better, which has just come into force. And then similarly, the Ministry of Education and Ministry of Finance have recently switched the school ID that was being used to the latest new robust MS codes. So yeah, there's been good progress on there as well. And as Iman says, the data harmonization working group can hopefully drive this forward as well. So just kind of finally finished up on some of the key lessons from this work. I think when we were thinking about the data for decision-making systems, we're kind of thinking about some of the people, the processes, and the technology. And actually, often it's the tech is the easier part, and it's the people and the processes that are the most important things to and the hardest things to get right. An example here is we're saying, so developing verification method for the school census this year so that it could flag schools quickly if any anomalies in the data came up. But there were challenges in ensuring kind of the funds for the school quality assurance officers and the district staff to go back and check those anomalies. So yeah, there's different kind of processes that need to still be ironed out in some of these. I think as well, so yeah, some of the kind of things that might seem simple on the surface can be quite complex and need to be decided between the Ministry of Education to kind of set out some of these things. So there's been particularly work in terms of the school approval policy, thinking about what qualifies as a school and what are the minimum standards that a Ministry of Education requires for that school to be allowed to operate and to receive government funding, and as well thinking about the kind of catchment planning policy that the ministry's developed. There was a initial wish to kind of set a target of a distance to a school, a maximum distance from any child to a school, but that's kind of there was reasons that this becomes kind of unaffordable and inefficient, and so there's with kind of more discussion with the ministry has moved towards a system of deciding where best to use the resources you have, rather than kind of targets that might be difficult or unattainable in the budget constraints. And finally, thinking in terms of where we started off with a school census being done, but kind of not necessarily being kept in the most organized fashion. I think it's important that running a data system is not just is not the same as running just one round of an MS data, and so there's important priorities that needed in terms of ensuring that unique IDs stay unique across time. And here we can get different challenges in terms of if the admin boundaries change and the MS code is dependent on the admin boundaries. This can be something that happens. The National Bureau of Statistics can change the admin boundaries, but this affects the Ministry of Education. So this is important things to kind of ensure harmonization across the different ministries. And then finally, as also came up in some of the conversations this morning, the key part here is around the data architecture. So ensuring that whilst different systems, data systems are not necessarily by themselves a bad thing, there might be reasons why Teaching Service Commission needs some things that the Ministry of Education doesn't or the Ministry of Finance doesn't, but just ensuring the interoperability of these systems is crucial, and is one of the main ways that Sierra Leone is trying to move forward in the next few years. Thanks very much.
Great. So I think we've managed to successfully cover pretty much, I'm just noting down, like everything from politics and incentives to data governance, specific tech options, and how you present and use data in specific cases. So we've got a lot that we can go down and use for this. So this is really great. So thanks for kind of doing that very wide-ranging kind of set of insights. So I guess, you know, now we've got kind of Q&A time for the next 35 minutes or so. I will check. I don't have anyone for comments on questions online. I don't see, unless there are.
Not yet.
Not yet. So open to the room.
Maybe prompt the online audience.
Yeah. So if anyone is online and you do have questions, please write please write them in the chat, and Carl can forward them on to me. And yes, over there in the back, because I've got, otherwise Susan's given me a long list of her own questions that I can interject with.
Great, thank you very much. Hi, I'm Alex Metcalf, I'm the head of public sector at ACCA. It's really fascinating to hear about the work that you're doing on education information systems. But what connects in my mind is the focus that we're seeing in PFM now on sustainability reporting. So from ACCA's perspective, we've actually funded the IPSAS board to undertake work now on developing international sustainability reporting standards. It'd be really interesting to hear from the panel. And when I say to help them in funding it, it's actually the research and scoping phase. So it is quite a foundational point now for us to really input on what's needed on an international basis. So it'd be great to hear from the panel with the education hat on and thinking of SDG 4, having the right quality and access to education. Are there data standards that are operating within your areas of focus that could help in setting international sustainability reporting standards? So are there particular, I think you're talking about data architecture, for example, Ali, as one example there. And from what you're already doing, are there ways in which you'd hope that an international framework might come into place that you could kind of plug in what you already have to creating sustainability reports by ministries and by whole of government?
Thanks. Any other questions now?
Alistair brought up the point in his presentation that a lot of the kind of data and education is like supply driven, but there seems to be, Sierra Leone seems to be an interesting case study where it seems like there's a lot of demand for education data for policy making. I just wonder if you could talk a little bit more specifically about where that demand is coming from.
So why don't I go to Bioku? Why don't we start with you on that question, and if you've got a view on the kind of the data sustainability kind of architecture question as well, and then we'll go to Ali. You next.
Yeah, sure. Happy to jump in here. Looking at talking about specifically where the demand for data is coming from, actually, from my experience, is actually coming from the top. It's coming from, at first, the Minister Senge. He is very keen and very much pushing forward the fact that he wants the entire ministry to be using data for decision making. And because it's coming from the top, I guess everyone is just kind of jumping in, and everyone's getting more and more excited about it as we learn more and as people actually see how this data can be used. In a lot of the talks he gives, he always makes sure that there is data to back up what he's saying. And I think that at all levels, we're being able to see, okay, so if we can see an increase in the number of, in the attendance here, okay, how can we make that work for us in our school? Why is that happening? If our teachers are, if they can actively see that, let's say 50% of the teachers are not attending regularly, okay, we have data that shows us this is happening, but why? And now everyone's actually starting to ask those questions. And I had a conversation actually not too long ago last week with some district officers, and you can see that they're using this data they're collecting on their school quality assurance visits to feed back to their district officers and be like, okay, this is what I've found, how can we help them improve? So I would definitely say that, yes, it's kind of started from the top, which is really ideal. I think having a minister who wants to enhance the use of data for decision-making makes a big difference, but it's definitely trickling down. I think as it trickles down, what we need now is for it to get wider. So it's not just some individuals who are using it at the district level, but it's all. So yeah, I think that's kind of where we're at in terms of that. And I would say for the other questions that were mentioned on the international frameworks that we'd hope to use, I think this is something that we definitely need to incorporate into the work we're doing in Sierra Leone. There aren't at the moment really any frameworks nationally that are being used, but as we're kind of trying to set up this data working group and actually start to try and consolidate this better, I think we're definitely going to need something that we can work with and work on, something that has got using those international standards, but I don't know if we're quite there yet on something that we'd be able to share. I think back to the chair, you wanted to pass over to Ali.
Yeah, go on, Ali, why don't you build on that?
Thanks, Iman. Yeah, I'll answer about the demand side of things first as well, just to add to what Iman's saying. I think on one side, as well, a lot of this data, there's a real interest in making it public that does come from the top, but as this is seen, there's the DSTI, the Directorate of Science, Technology and Innovation made an education data hub that was publicly showing this data. and linking as well the exam data to the school census data. So that's been available for a few years. And yeah, these different cases of basically the more data you see, I think it's really helping increase the demand. And a second sort of side for the demand, I think, is we started showing some of the data for decision-making tools that we've been developing with the Ministry of Education. And one example here, the catchment planning tool of where to build new schools and where to build new classrooms. I think the demand here as well kind of comes from kind of two sides. One is if you can make someone's job easier, they're gonna use it and they're gonna want to, it's gonna be taken in. If you're gonna make someone's job harder, you've got a bigger battle. So in terms of this planning tool, the ministry knew they were going to have more funding. There's going to be funding from the World Bank to build extra classrooms in schools over the next few years, and that there'll be a few rounds of choosing which schools to build in. Now, this could involve spending a week at a time, a week each year, going through Excels and trying to do some of the analysis. Or the way that we've been able to set up this tool with the Directorate of Policy and Planning is that it's a case of the link is public, you can see it, but it's a case of about 6 clicks. Choose the level you want to build. You can choose between whether you want to prioritize remote schools, poorer areas, and like more overcrowded, or more schools that or more areas that don't have children in school. And you can balance between those, and then you can say how much schools you have budget for, and then you click, it comes up and it tells you the reason why. And so I think this is one way that you can help drive demand, is if you can make people's lives easier. And just another point on that is as well, ministries of education and directors of policy and planning and these people, that they face, I think, constant demands from people. Why aren't you building a school in my area? Or why my school's overcrowded? Why aren't you building classrooms there? And having, there's a lot of need across Sierra Leone, but having something that you can publicly show and say, this is where we're building and this is the reason why, can protect you from these like political pressures, and ensure that ensure it's not just based on the loudest voice, but it's based on the data where these decisions are being made. And to answer the question about the kind of international data standards, I think it's a great question. I think I don't know the full history of it, but I know there's been an effort towards open EMIS that did try and make some of these kind of standardized things. I think I think there is difficulties in getting countries to agree on different things in general. So I think there is some things that you could build from there, but I don't think it ever kind of got globally accepted. So I think that would be a useful resource to look at. And I think one thing that we've just seen as we were building the 2015 to 2022 data set is that one of the key things is ensuring if you can ask, get the same data in the same format each year is so much more valuable. And if you ask a question just in a different way one year, or if you have a different possible set of answers, you can no longer compare it to the previous years, and it's much less useful. So I think one of the things that we've been working on as well is trying to ensure that there's this core set of data that is collected no matter what in the same way. You can have optional things that could change each year if you wanted to particularly look at something that's a bit more niche, but for the core data, if we can get this global agreement, it would be really useful to ensure that things are more comparable across years and across countries.
Yeah, Marco.
Oh, thank you. Just a few considerations. There was a slide that Iman put on the screen that kind of sort of hit me, the one in which you said there were, 17, whatever, 9 departments, and then, sorry, 11 departments, and then 9 + 9 + 3 again, collecting data all over the place. And we keep whining and complaining of the fragmentation, etc. I've yet to see an analysis or case studies that's try to answer the question, how did we get there? So it's not people kind of wakes up in the morning and say, I'll start collecting data. There is an institutional setup that has evolved over the year. There is a legislative framework that gives authority to somebody to collect data or certain things. I think it seems to be, to me, and I'm clearly, this may be a bit a naive statement, kind of missing a piece of the puzzle here. Because then if we say, as you said, Alistair, yeah, it's easy to say, improve coordination, etc. Then it gets difficult. Well, it gets difficult because we might be missing these pieces of analysis. Because again, at one point, if you have a legislative framework that for some bizarre reason gives authority to collect data to 25 different agencies, a different level of governments, kind of stuck. So you have to kind of unwind that process to try to figure out exactly to come up with a more coherent and consistent framework to collect data and report, etc. So that's consideration number one. But also the question whether anybody is aware of a study of that kind. I think for the other Alistair, I think we're putting a little bit too much faith on data. I hate to be David's advocate, etc. The decision not taken based on data. That's just a fact in governments. There are political economic factors. You want a school in a place, even there are 0 students because whatever, I want to steal students from all the other areas and build up my constituency and vice versa, etc. And it's never an isolated case. You need a school, you need the road, you need security, you need electricity, you need the. So again, I don't know whether Sierra Leone has one of those, what we call dual budgeting system, which clearly ends up complicating things because decisions on building a school kind of belong to a particular ministry, which is again a center of power, if you will, or if not monopoly in certain areas. And then you have to negotiate your way through the other side of the budget, which is, well, hiring teachers, make sure you have a school, make sure you have security services, make sure you may need a clinic if there's a rural school, and so on and so forth. So that's again a sort of a critique, so to speak, to this perhaps excessively sectoral approach. So okay, the other things is to take a more of a holistic view. The data, not. I don't want to diminish, by all means, what you say. You need the data absolutely, but again, having these maps based on some probably multivariate spatial analysis, etc. It's great, it's good, but we have to be realistic. Decisions are not taken that, but hopefully data are considered as well, but there are so many other factors that we need to take into account and try to understand. And I go back, the political, economic, historical reasons, and so on and so forth. Sorry, these are more than questions of perhaps consideration of kind of a little bit of whining from my side. Thank you.
You had a question as well.
Thanks. Well, probably this comment. Our revenue sharing formula with our provinces is influenced by the number of school-going children, and it's there's always a big fight when you have to base money on that. So this obviously a very interesting presentation. Was thinking, you spoke about just kind of cleaning up the data and getting it working. So are you looking at things like linking up to your population register for using IDs and stuff like that in order to manage? As I was listening to this, I was thinking about systems where you actually use this to register children so that you can get the parents involved, at the initial phase in order to ensure that the quality of the data is improved. Maybe links to other systems. So you might have grant systems or things like that, maybe even your tax system, I don't know, but it's probably, you would have to look at kind of areas where you do interact with the poor as well. And then me being a vindictive type, there would probably also have to be some other sort of link back to your HR system if you want to start thinking about doing something about managing the absenteeism. Yeah, so those probably just a few comments to get your views on that. Thanks.
Okay, there's definitely enough there. Okay, Gundula, do you want to add one more to the mix? Yeah. Wait for the mic.
Yes, thank you. So my question is to Ali. So you mentioned at some point that the government of Sierra Leone was also interested in putting some of this education information out into the public sphere and share it, make it publicly available. I guess my question is, could you explain a bit more where that interest comes from? What is it driven by? And have you noticed any civil society actors like NGOs or journalists or anyone picking up on that data and using it for advocacy or for any kind of public discussion around education policy? And maybe to add on, if that is happening, do you also see some tensions or maybe some reluctance sort of slowly growing within government, or sort of being like a sort of selection over what type of information to put out and whatnot? Thank you. I just hand on to you.
Yeah, okay, let's just deal with those, I think, first. So I'll try and summarize them, because I think there's basically there's a question about why did fragmentation arise, and what I think would be interesting for people to understand that in the context of Sierra Leone. There's this question of how is data an input into decision making, and how is it kind of balanced amongst other options. I suppose the kind of this very technocratic allocation of schools has to kind of factor in with both a sort of the kind of political choices that need to be made and the values that need to be balanced, plus I suppose a kind of point around governance and who makes that decision. And I guess I'd frame a bit the questions, the point you were making is a bit about data gaming. I mean, one of the things I was a bit surprised didn't come out in the conversation I've heard from other countries is that, sort of school, particularly when you link resources to kind of places, right? So capitation grants, you do get this gaming of the education figures. And I know this happens, for example, in Tanzania. There's been concerns about it in Uganda. So this kind of data gaming question, and maybe how that relates to the single source of truth. So if there's, where is that truth? If you've got this concern with data, and how do you kind of use the different systems to essentially come to that decision about what's a kind of credible number? And then lastly, this point about transparency of the information and how that's kind of feeding through into public debate, where that's coming from. Let me go in that kind of reverse order again. So Iman, if we could start with you, and you, I suppose, pick the ones that you kind of feel you're kind of, where you're wanting to respond to, and I'll kind of call you up if there's any that you really need to kind of talk to after.
Sure, apologies. I think I might have dropped off in the middle of a couple of the questions. As I mentioned, I'm taking this call from Freetown, and today the internet has decided that it doesn't want to be on our side. So I'm hoping that you'll be able to hear me to answer these questions now. Luckily, I'm even surprised it managed to stay on for the whole presentation. I was really praying that it would. The question I did actually hear before it kind of started getting a cut was the question on why did fragmentation arise? And I think that is such a good and important question that I don't think we always ask ourselves. So from the work we were doing and from my experience working in the ministry, I think one of the reasons why the fragmentation arose and why there was all this duplication was different directorates not trusting other directorates. So as Ali mentioned, FabInc worked with the Director of Planning and Policy, they manage the annual school census. And that is an exercise that happens every year in the ministry, pretty much without a doubt. And that's the main source of data collection at the ministry. But the issue is that's the main source, but you have a lot of other directorates that don't necessarily trust the annual school census, which is a huge issue. So because they don't necessarily trust what's happening in the school census, they then want to go and do their own data collection because they think that it will be more credible. So I think that's one issue. And I think the other issue is one thing I mentioned about different directorates working with different donor partners, and they're not necessarily talking to each other. I think the directorates aren't talking to each other. I think the donors aren't talking to each other. Even us partners who are supporting the ministry aren't always talking to each other. And so you get one thing that's being funded by EU with the Planning and Policy Department, and then you have another system being funded by World Bank, for example, that's working with a different directorate. All of these things are kind of doing very similar data collections, very similar dashboards, but it's slightly different, and you have a different donor. And because no one's talking to each other and everyone kind of just wants to have what they want to have, it's just not worked. And I think, Ali, I can see you're smiling, because I think we've both kind of seen how that's kind of arisen and how that's just been such an issue. And I think now, this time, the way we're trying to kind of deal with why did the fragmentation arise is this collaboration between partners. That's only one part of it. But I guess between this, we're also trying to make sure that all the directorates do have an input into the annual school census, and that they actually do trust the data collection. They understand the process, they believe in the process, they're part of it as well, instead of just kind of being a directorate looking from the outside in. So I think that's one part that I think will help. But I really did like that question and that thought process that you went through. One other thing I wanted to touch on was looking at the system linkages that I kind of picked up when my internet was in the middle of dropping. So hopefully I haven't got this question wrong, but just an example of what the government are doing now to link the systems is that our National Civil Registration Authority, so the NCRA, are actually working directly with the ministry to give students national insurance numbers, and those are going to be linked to the MS system that is going to be used in the ministry. So although I think we do have a way to go, I think that's a really good start. It's not just the ministry kind of trying to do their own thing, but they are trying to also work with the different government agencies. And Ali also mentioned the work with the Ministry of Finance. It was a big thing to get the Ministry of Finance to use MS codes, which is kind of crazy, because why wouldn't you want to use it? But they already had their own system that worked for them, and it obviously wasn't working for the ministry. So you had that huge disconnect. So the fact that they've both said, okay, we're in agreement, we're definitely going to all use MS codes, is a massive thing in itself, particularly for looking at paying teachers on payroll, making sure that the different schools get subsidies. Like, this is a really, really big thing. And all it is them just switching a code from one thing to another thing that they both already had. They just both weren't using the same thing. So yeah, we're kind of getting there slowly but surely. But yeah, I'll hand back over to the chair.
Thanks very much. So I don't know, Ali, whether you want to kind of build on from that.
I think Iman was covering a few of the different things. I think in terms of the kind of balancing the reality, the political reality, and the sort of the governance side of things, I think perhaps in this very first case with the planning tools has been useful because it was a World Bank funded program. So maybe that reduced some of the problems, but I think as well, it's about kind of having something that you can, for the ministry, can improve trust. So with the Ministry of Finance, can show, like, if we get these resources, we do have processes in place to ensure that it is spent well. And so I think, I know, as you say, that things can't always just be perfectly based on data, but I think making it as easy as possible for the data that is there to be used is kind of a useful step in that way.
There's a point on transparency.
Yeah, and the transparency side, it's I think it's quite interesting. In terms of, since the data's been made public, Iman, this was a question about if any kind of civil society actors had sort of taken it up, and if there'd been kind of anything that had come out of it that had then increased resistance to data being made public. And I can't think of particular examples there. I mean, one that I can think is the Minister of Education using this data in his discussions with different stakeholders. So in terms of when they were negotiating teacher salaries, he was sending pictures of like, this is the data, this is the teachers, this is the sort of situation that we're dealing with, and trying to use this to help everyone be on the same page and know that even when resources are limited, this is kind of the way that we want to use them. So that's kind of one example I would think. But I haven't seen, Iman, I don't know if you have any other examples you'd think there.
No, I haven't seen any issues that have come out of the data being made public. I think that the only thing that was, I guess, a bit of a concern or a worry at one point was people not necessarily being able to understand the data on the Education Data Hub. Like your average person wouldn't necessarily understand the different graphs that are being used. And so I think maybe that there was some concern about how accessible it was, but not in terms of what the data is actually saying, but more, can people understand it? How are people going to use it? Why? Like that kind of thing. But I think the fact that it's been made public wasn't a bad thing. That I think people did take to, which is really good.
And maybe just to add as well about the sort of gaming the data side, I think, in Sierra Leone, subsidies are based on the number of children in schools. And so I think it's something that everyone is aware of, and that the ministry does follow up with headcount checks, to try and do extra verification. And this is one of the things that we had running on the daily checks of this school census is, has any school jumped in pupils from last year that we wouldn't expect and go back. So yeah, again, I think it's just kind of incremental steps to try and improve trust in the process. Do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I don't know. I just feel I'm hearing too much positive about the World Bank, but obviously, a lot of it is about what director wants it more, and the slack in the system financially is often outside of the government, and it's kind of kept back, and it's given to whichever director looks the strongest. And you have seen, to kind of answer your question in reverse, Marco, you've seen in some countries where there is this kind of centralization, one of the bits that does benefit is the kind of data harmonization. So while I was rude about Tanzania before, that's one of the things that happened, right? There was a ministry that wanted it more, had really huge kind of amounts of talent there as well at the time. And that's a lot of the kind of data tasks across government have ended up in that ministry because it worked at the time. But it's the same where I come from. Like it's, you give it to whoever wants it more. If it's a particularly important task, maybe you invent an executive agency and they do it instead for a while. And of course they need their own IT budget. But part of the more interesting thing to say maybe is like the learning, like who solves the learning crisis. The evidence changes quite a lot on that, and whether it's a very complex task, what matters the most, what constraints matter the most, and that moves up and down the government system. So we might want to give, we'd love to give everything to ward education officers or kind of head teachers. But there might also be a particular thing that you think needs to happen at the centre, just because of where you can buy the talent really, or where the mandate sits legally, or where the power lies at the time in cabinet.
Well, I think we've got probably time for like one or two short questions. If anyone,
there are questions.
Sorry. Okay, they haven't come through here.
Oh, sorry. So there's one from. There's one from Nick.
There's one from Nick Travis. So Nick said, great presentations and fascinating to learn about the various constraints and successes collecting better data in Sierra Leone. Perhaps I suffer from some selection bias, but even now it seems quite rare to encounter even quite basic data sets, such as the number of teachers and the number of pupils disaggregated by school, that do not suffer from serious problems or inconsistencies across sources. These two pieces of data are fundamental for budget preparation, since they inform teacher pupil ratios, textbooks ratios, etc. At the same time, there's now an emerging emphasis on establishing more advanced data systems aimed at providing more granular student level data that can be used for efforts to mitigate the learning crisis. However, I wonder if this can be realistically achieved if even the more basic systems do not yet function well or start to crumble when donors withdraw. To what extent should a basics first approach govern the approach to data? So sorry, I should have summarized that, but it's a question around sustainability. So I think it might be useful to get some reflections on like what happens when projects end. I can say from my own experience, I've spent a lot of time in countries working on projects where I'm linking data together. But I have a lot of incentives to do that because I'm a researcher and I think I'm going to write a research paper afterwards. Whether I do or not is another question. You know, but government officials don't. So often what I see is work that I've done linking data sets together that doesn't sustain beyond a couple of years after my involvement. I've been very pleasantly surprised in some instances, but not always. But it'd be good to maybe final reflections on sustainability might be good.
Yeah, maybe that's a good way to end as well. So Iman, why don't we start with you, and then Ali, and then Alistair, and going in that order.
I think I agree. First of all, how can we expect a really complex system to function if the basics don't? I think where we're at, I know we talk about a high level and we talk about moving forward and what we're doing next, but I think one thing I have to admit that we are doing is actually trying to work on the basic systems. We're trying to make sure that right now that the annual school census makes sense, that each year it follows the same pattern. We're trying to make sure that when school quality assurance officers go to schools, that they're filling out the forms, that they're verifying the attendance of these students, they're verifying the attendance of teachers. And I do feel that, and I know that we have a way to go, and I will always say that, I do think that we are trying to start at the basics. We do show these dashboards and we show these systems, and that's kind of what we're getting to, but we definitely do have a focus on, okay, we need to know how many teachers are in school. We need to make sure these teachers are staying in school all day. How can we do that? And we're doing that through the one tablet per school program. So although we are trying to make sure that the architecture works for later on, when we want to ask a lot more complex questions, when we want to ask school leaders to fill out a whole census form on their own, we will get there and we will have the systems to do that. But I think we are kind of trying to get those basics sort of sorted out first, which is good. On the sustainability part, I think that's a really difficult question. And I honestly feel like even since I was working at the ministry that we have this conversation like every couple of weeks. And I think the issue is that it is difficult with sustainability, and I'm not sure if I have an answer for you as to what happens when the donor program finishes, because I know one thing that everyone aspires to do is to hand over the systems to the ministry, and to make sure that they're working with the ministry to, you know, make sure that they understand it, to build capacity so that you can hand it over. And I think one thing that happened when I was working in the delivery unit was people kept coming to us, and at the time we weren't necessarily meant to be there for more than 18 months. Can we hand it over to the delivery team? And it's like, well, no, because we're not consistent in the ministry, you know? So I don't think I have an answer for you, but it's definitely something that we also all worry about, and I think are concerned about, because the ministry are doing so many things, so many good things. They are, but there's so much to do, and there's just not enough capacity to do it. Like, that's the truth of it. So you have these programs, yes, they bring extra capacity and they bring these different programs, but there might not necessarily be enough people to even hand over the system to. So I think that's probably more a reflection, sorry, than an answer to your question. But if we do ever work that out, how we're gonna hand it all over when the donors pull out, definitely, hopefully be able to get back to you on that.
Sentence or two to build on that. That was a pretty good one to end on.
Yeah, I think Ivan covered it. I think, yeah, just from our perspective, some of the work that we've been doing is just on the sustainability side, it is, yeah, trying to make things as easy as possible so that, yeah, so that it is easier for people to fit into their day-to-day roles that makes someone's job easier, and then they'll keep using it. Yeah, even if when the money stops. So yeah, I think that's one of the things that we're trying to focus on.
Yeah, well, I suppose it's about looking at the kind of potential payoff, but also the persistence. So if you have a data structure that is going to fall away after the donor leaves, but redoes teacher allocation, there's a paper recently that says that's kind of worth 10 to 12% of your wage bill in lower income countries. Torsten Walter paper or something. And then there's also on the other end, there's the payoff. So you can do some things if you're informing how you do in-service teacher training, that's almost so valuable that it doesn't matter if it stops after 4 years. So I guess, yeah, it was a bit of a cold, boring answer, but it's just kind of what is the expected payoff really of the reform that you're actually supporting?
And therefore, how long does it need to run for?
Yeah.
All right, there you go. Thanks very much, everyone. We're going to go for coffee, I think. So, and we're back in sort of just over 12 minutes, I think. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Ali. Thanks, Alistair. And thanks, Iman. It's really great. Really good to have you. Thanks for dialing, Sierra Leone.